Kia ora, hello and Guten Tag. Welcome to Berlin Wall Stories, an exhibition that was commissioned by the German Embassy in Wellington in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It explores the perspectives of 10 unique people and their relationship with the Berlin Wall, a concrete wall that once divided East and West Berlin, and the border strip that ran between the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic. You're about to hear a recorded interview with one of our participants who shared their personal Mauergeschichte, their Berlin Wall story. Enjoy and viel Spaß beim Zuhören.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm Quinn. My family is German. My parents are both German, but I was born here in New Zealand, down in Christchurch, which is where I grew up my whole life, but we always would visit Germany every few years. I always had a big love for theatre and acting as a child and as a teenager, and I thought that's where I'd go. But then after high school, I switched and decided to study fashion up here in Wellington. And I was really drawn to Wellington because of the creative arts community here, because of the queer community here, and because my brother had moved up here a few years earlier as well, and he really loved the city, so I thought it'd be nice to live close to him. And there's a good fashion school here, so those are the things that brought me here. Now I've been, living here for almost 4 years throughout my whole degree, and just coming towards the end of that degree now.
And how does that feel like?
Good, really exciting. Yeah, really exciting to have a full body of work to show after this degree and move on to the next things, I guess.
Perfect. You already mentioned the queer community. So you are part of the queer community here in Wellington as well. How can I imagine that community? What is it like?
It's great here. It's for such a small city, it's surprisingly big, I'd say, because I think definitely Wellington attracts queer people. I'd say that because it attracted me for that reason. I personally, in the queer community, I'm a drag queen here, so every now and then I perform in drag at the local drag bar Ivy down on Cuba Street. I don't get to perform as much as I'd like to because uni keeps me very busy, so I'm hoping to next year, once I'm done with uni, be able to get further into drag. And that's where the queer community really comes alive for me in Wellington, is at these drag shows. And there's also a small kind of ballroom Vogue community that's also been building up here. Right. Really great city for it.
And is everybody supporting each other and enhancing each other in their work and their creative work here?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. And definitely there's a bit of a crossover into Massey University, which is the Wellington campus here is primarily the arts and design. So that obviously brings with it lots of creative people, lots of queer people. So that's really, and it's right in the heart of the city as well, which is great. Compared
to Christchurch, is there a big difference in terms of how you feel? Is it more welcoming or probably vibrant?
I think so, yeah. Wellington definitely, because it's such a small condensed city, everyone's living so much closer to each other in Wellington. It's easy to see people around on the street, whereas in Christchurch, it's so much more spread out. I think it's harder to find people similar to you in Christchurch. I often find it hard to properly compare the two because I haven't really lived in Christchurch as an adult. But I definitely felt like Christchurch wasn't going to be the place for me as a student. It didn't feel exciting to me in the way that Wellington did. And so I'm really glad that I've moved up here.
I'd like to know how you felt like when you visited Germany for the first time. Maybe as an older, like as a teenager, maybe as a child it's different, but as a teenager or a young man, how do you feel about Germany?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think because I can't remember the first time I visited Germany because, I visited as a child many times. I think actually when I was from 6 months old to about 2 years old, we lived in Germany as well and then moved back here. And then every few years I moved back. So can't really give a first time, but I do specifically remember the first time I went back as an adult, or I was 17, almost an adult, and I went by myself as well. And visited my grandparents. I was in England for something else and then visited my grandparents in Germany for a week. And I specifically remember, just feeling very at home in Germany, even though I knew it wasn't my proper home. That was definitely Christchurch in New Zealand and where I grew up. I think just because of all my extended family being there and hearing the German language around me as well which I definitely noticed especially more going back to Germany last year, when that was the first time I'd gone to Germany since moving out of home, away from my parents. And I've noticed that since moving away from my parents, I speak a lot less German, whereas at home we always spoke German. Now I only really speak German when I see my brother and when I call my parents. So then going back to Germany last year, and I was just constantly surrounded by German-speaking people, that definitely made me feel very, very at home, and I really loved that.
Maybe as we grow up, we might think about those countries we are related to in a different way. Does that make sense for you?
I think so, definitely. Yeah, I think there was definitely a feeling, this is where my immediate family is all in New Zealand, but all my extended family is in Germany. I think that definitely kind of hit closer to home last time I went there as well, because I realised everyone's growing up. It's a bit harder to always track down where everyone is.
I was able to read your bachelor thesis, your project, and you pointed out that you had visited a city called Bautzen in the east of Germany, and that really kind of kicked off, I guess, the whole idea of how you might come across with an idea for the fashion project and for the whole bachelor thesis. So what was this visit for you? What did it mean to you, this family trip?
Yes. So last year, when I was in Germany, me and my parents, we drove through Germany. We went to Czechia as well for a bit. But we made a stop in Bautzen, the small city that's known for the Bautzen II, this biggest Stasi prison at the time in Germany. And it's now been opened, for quite a while now, it's been opened as a museum. And you can go in there and read about all the people, lots of people that were imprisoned there, and all the different histories, because it wasn't just a Stasi prison. Before that was also a Nazi prison, and after that it was just a general German prison for a wee bit. So it's had a crazy history, this one particular prison. And I think it was, just so interesting and eye-opening being in there and reading about people that were imprisoned for many, many years, or decades sometimes, for things that are just normal human rights of, like, normal freedom that we have here in New Zealand, of just being maybe politically open with your opinion, or, just moving freely between countries and states and stuff like that, that could land you in Bautzen for many, many years. And it was, you could really feel the history in the place. I remember I was very impressed by the how the museum's been done. It was very quiet, the museum. There were hardly any people there as well. Something that really brought it back. It was just empty, and you would just walk through all the different rooms. It was really eye-opening.
And did you know about this place before? Have you ever heard of it? Or what was your, I guess, knowledge on the wider Germany history, GDR, West Germany? What did you know and what did you learn?
I didn't know about Bautzen specifically. I think the only really Stasi prison I'd vaguely heard of was the one in Berlin, from a movie or two that I'd watched. Most of my GDR knowledge and history came from watching some movies and TV shows when I was a teenager. I mean, when I visited my cousins once, we watched a few films like The Lives of Others, just Leben der Anderen, and Goodbye Lenin and stuff like that. And then with my parents once, I watched the show Deutschland 83 and the subsequent seasons, and Sonnenallee, the film as well. So most of my knowledge had come from watching these films and TV shows up until this year, when I really delved into research into it.
Yeah, and what have you learned from your research? Like, overall, did that change your mind about this part of the German history?
I think so, yeah. I think it was interesting to kind of learn the more nuances of the place, because I think from the movies and TV shows, you'd either seen it as this extreme authoritarian place where no one has any freedom and everything's grey, which isn't true. And then maybe Goodbye Lenin is a film that paints it a bit too pretty and nostalgic, and doesn't and maybe Sonnenallee as well, which makes it just look a bit fun and silly sometimes. So I think it was interesting to kind of read proper articles and do some proper research, and to kind of realise the middle point there of what the GDR was. Lots of people just did live very normal lives. And then many people didn't live very normal lives compared to what we live. But it wasn't the case for everyone. I actually do remember one of my, many years ago, one of my uncles talking to him who grew up there, and he does say that he just had a very normal German upbringing. He doesn't feel like he grew up in a, if I remember correctly, he doesn't feel like he grew up in a wild authoritarian state or something. So I think that was good to learn this year, is that it's not an insane place for everyone, and to learn these nuances.
So your family had relatives living in the eastern part and in the western part?
My family, no. I think most of my family is all from, grew up and lived in the western parts. This was an uncle-in-law, so one of my auntie's husbands or something. But none of my direct family grew up. So I think it was nice to also learn into German history that I hadn't just learned through family members. And because all of my kind of German knowledge was rooted in the western sides of Germany. Those are the parts I'd visited, because that's where most of my family lives. Sure. So it was good to kind of get a more whole idea of Germany. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. Yeah. I was wondering about the chat happening within like a Western German family about the East. Yeah. Or was there like a narrative that you were used to, such as they are all just complaining, and you know what I mean? Like there's always like cliches on both sides, I guess. So what was that chatter in your family, immediate family?
I think in my immediate family, to be honest, there wasn't that much chatter about East Germany that I can remember. I think when we did talk about it, it was always from a kind of a position of, my parents were very aware of like the Stasi. One of my mum's favourite books is Stasi Land. And so I think that's more the kind of chatter is that I learned about, was more the authoritarian sides of it. And I didn't really learn about these maybe kind of East German stereotypes until doing more research this year, and also like chats with you when I asked you for research about for my project as well.
Yeah, we have to disclose that here, so it's a vice versa thing. I was privileged to speak to you about my heritage, if you like, to put it into a frame, and I invited Quinn to come along and be part of the Berlin Wall exhibition, which I quite appreciate, because it's exciting to hear a young person to really try and get the head around this part of history. I mean, you have a relation to it because your parents are German, but I'm wondering how people from New Zealand that are your age or even younger might think about this part of history, because to me it is very present here to talk about the First World War and the Second World War, of course, Nazis and so on, but I wonder if there's any interest in that more recent part of the history in Germany. Yeah,
I'd say in talking to my friends at uni and people in my class, no one really knew what I was talking about at the start. They didn't really, I think a few people vaguely heard of East Germany. People didn't really realise that there were two different countries. They'd all heard about the Berlin Wall, but I don't know if they fully understood that meant that there was actually East Germany and West Germany, two different countries. And that I think that took a bit of a while of explaining to some of my friends at uni as well what my project was about specifically. Because they were like, what even is East Germany? Is it just the east part of Germany? And I was like, no, it was a whole country. It was a whole nation. Definitely I think it's something that people don't really know about, and also is always overshadowed by the Third Reich and the Holocaust and stuff. That's what we learn about in school in New Zealand. That's the only kind of German history you would learn about here in school. Right. Except for actually once we did do a project on the lives of others. We did discuss that.
That's great. It's a great film.
We did once analyse that film in high school. That was great, but I'm not sure that's the case for most high school students.
Right. Why did you decide to base a whole project on that topic also for your creative part of sewing, costumes, fashion? So why was that? Why did you decide to focus on that kind of topic?
Yeah, so we had to. This year for our honours and bachelor's combined project, there had to be real research focus to the project. It couldn't just be making clothes that we liked. There had to be some kind of research backing it. I knew going into this year that I wanted to work around theatrical fashion and expressive fashion. That's something I'd worked on last year as well. And that's what kind of draws me to fashion, is the kind of theatrical and grand nature that fashion can take. But starting the year, I found that I couldn't, it was too broad or vague of a topic to just start researching. And I always kind of knew in the back of my mind, I was like, if I ever need to do like a research project, it'd be so interesting to research into East Germany because I'd like to know more about this. I think it's a fascinating part of history that I have some form of relationship to. And then, and talking to my lecturers, I kind of brought that up, that was something interesting. They were like, oh, that's something interesting you should look into, because my general theatrical fashion was a bit too vague. And luckily I found a way to tie those really together in looking how authoritarian regimes like East Germany can, how the relationship with theatrical fashion, theatrical self-expression can be there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was intrigued by a quote of yours in your work. You said that you got reminded that personal freedom can't be taken for granted, and it's also fragile. And I was like, this is an interesting one. So why can't it be taken for granted? Because probably nowadays everybody is like, I can express myself, and probably there's some problems coming along with that, but still no one from the state comes to me to say you can't be a drag queen, for example.
Exactly, yeah.
So, it's interesting that you feel drawn to this GDR system, and it's all very extreme, perhaps, in terms of personal rights.
Yeah.
What did you find out? How was life there?
In the GDR?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's great question, I think. Yeah, I think I really was focusing more on like the late 70s and the 80s was where my research was focused. Obviously, it's a long period of history, the GDR. And I was specifically focused on queer history there. That's kind of where I wanted to go specifically with my history, to make it more personal to me. And what I found out is that in the 70s there was actually a lot more queer community and gay rights than I expected, which was really interesting to find out when going into this project. I wasn't expecting homosexuality to be decriminalised and legalised in the late 60s, I believe it was.
Yes.
Before West Germany did the same, a couple of years before, which that was
68,
really...
68, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, 68. That's, I did not expect that at first. That
was new to me as well. I didn't know that. Thank you for informing me on that. Yeah, so there was more, so there was obviously a queer community or a gay community, and I was pretty interested in that formation of the community you were talking about, because you said there was a special club that met and performed or organised shows. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yes, the Homosexuellen Interessengemeinschaft Berlin, or the Homosexual Interest Group Berlin, or the HIB, as I'll call it. They formed, I believe it was in the early 70s. The dates in my head might be slightly off. But they were kind of a social group that would meet and just to kind of foster a sense of queer community in East Berlin and the outskirts there. And they were definitely more focused on the community side of it, because they couldn't really focus on the political sides of it, or else they would be shut down straight away. But the community side of it was fine for them to do. And what I find really interesting is there was a trans woman called Charlotte von Marsdorf, I believe her name was, and she had like a big house on the outskirts of Berlin, and she would host big get-togethers and community events, which would sometimes bring in like 100 people or something, and that was really cool in the 70s already. That was really cool to hear. Yeah. So
they could exist. It was not restricted by the government or observed by the Stasi, or perhaps it was.
Yeah, they were observed. From what I read, they were observed, and people were approached by the Stasi to observe their fellow people in the community. But from as far as I understand correctly, they were allowed to exist. Where they didn't feel too much freedom was in expressing it publicly, very openly, or expressing it in a political way of gathering for the rights. Like they had to specifically stay as a social group and not a political group.
Right.
And they were also not fighting against socialism, which was interesting. They were definitely not anti-socialist. They were happy to exist in socialism, which
right.
Also
so they were
interesting.
accepted as a social group.
Yeah.
As long as they stood in their pockets, perhaps, or as long as they did not, I don't know, cooperate with the politics so much. I don't know, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's how I understand it to have worked. And then they kind of fizzled out towards the late 70s, I believe, and then kind of new groups started forming there was like the Zontags Club on Sundays where they'd form as they go to churches and meet in churches, which I think was also really interesting for one of that. We had queer groups meeting in churches on Sundays because those were some of the very few spaces that you could meet that weren't, run by the government.
exactly.
Yeah, they were completely independent from the state.
They were considered safe spaces as well. Whether
Mm-hmm.
or not you were religious.
This
is also where the peaceful revolution started, out of the church,
Mm-hmm.
because people felt safe to talk in a church.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That really combines it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You said also that the Soviet Union or the Eastern Bloc states, including the GDR, in there, homosexuality was seen as anti-socialist.
Yes, yeah. I think that was the earlier, before they kind of legalised it, it was seen as like a bourgeoisie decadence is how in an article that I read, is how they viewed it, which must have come from like the kind of 20s and 30s queer nightlife of Berlin and Paris and stuff like that, where they would throw these huge parties and stuff like that. And obviously bourgeoisie decadence is not something that went with socialism, so then that was considered to be anti-socialist, which is, I think, is when they start to, the kind of political hypocrisies start to form, because one of the things that the Nazis were very strong on was anti-homosexuality. So you would assume that socialism would then want to kind of undo the wrongdoings of that because they were so anti-fascist. But it took them a while. At first they adopted those laws, those same strong laws, just under different reasonings that weren't the same, under
Really
these bourgeoisie decadence.
Yeah. What do you think? How did the GDR linked clothing and individual expression, or even did they do that together? Because we know that there was like some political clothing, even with children in school. I like that you compared it to the Scouts here, or like other groups that might wear scarves or a special blouse. What did you find out in your research? How did you made up your mind about this?
Yeah, so through my research, I found out about the FDJ, the Freie Deutsche Jugend, or Free German Youth, which like kind of extracurricular activity for young East German children to learn how to be upstanding socialist citizens, essentially. And in reading that, I was like, oh my gosh, wow, they've got these bright uniforms, they all look the same. And then I kind of have to stop myself and think, oh, but that's actually not that different to school uniforms in New Zealand. It's just another uniform. And we have extracurricular Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, those things, where they're also wearing uniforms and look the same and have their tied scarves. So I had to kind of catch myself that it wasn't just the visual language that was the problem there, maybe of conformity, because that's also something we have here. Where I found what was interesting is that, or where the difference lies, is that that's directly tied to political assimilation and, I guess you can call it indoctrination of children to teach them these socialist values. Their uniform and their look and what they're being taught is all to teach them how to uphold socialism, which then in turn uphold conformity and authoritarianism.
That's right. Yeah. Did you find out that there was, especially like in the queer community, perhaps at the time, there were pockets of where people could express themselves as they wanted to, or did they have to suppress their individuality like completely?
Right, yeah, that's in the 80s, I think, is definitely where that became more possible. I think it was definitely already possible, but in the 70s through the HIB in Charlottetown and Malsburg. But then in the 80s we have the group CCD, Chic, Charmant and Dauerhaft, who were this amazing kind of underground fashion theatre group that would put on big theatrical fashion shows. They weren't specifically queer, but big, like they were definitely just alternative, and there were queer people in it, of course, which is why I've kind of researched into this more. And they were, very expressive. They felt very open to express themselves. It was also a shift in politics in the 80s that allowed them to be more open. And I think, the queer or gay rights moved forwards in politics and government levels in the 80s. And that allowed then groups like CCD to really become big and put on big fashion shows and kind of move from the underground to being above ground. And the specific person, Frank Schäfer, who was one of the models and stylists in the show, he then also became, I believe it was a photographer or stylist for the main fashion magazine, Exquisite. His success in an underground fashion group gave him actual career success as well, which was interesting because he would also get arrested on the street for wearing bright clothing and colourful haircuts and stuff like that. So it was...
Just going to ask that. That was not like something you would probably do, or you would stay in that community where this was allowed, or where you could express yourself. But once you had red hair or, I don't know, a glitter top, then you would have been viewed as not okay or correct, perhaps, at the time. In the 80s
in the early 80s. Yes, I think that's where this interesting kind of dichotomy happens, is where people like Frank would still be arrested, but then they couldn't actually hold him. They couldn't keep him in prison for anything, because by that time the laws had changed and they actually didn't have anything to persecute him for. But they would initially arrest him, then let him go, and then maybe the next, I don't know, a wee bit later they'd arrest him again. And then at the same time he had a job in a fashion magazine that was run by the state. So I think it's interesting to he'd be arrested for his expression, but then that expression was also being used for a magazine that was run by the state. So it's
quite ambivalent, isn't
it?
Yeah. Now, 1989, the wall came down, and suddenly there was a big room for expression, I guess. You already you based your work on two other artists, one coming from Hungary, still in the time when the wall was still standing, and one is from a later time, Ulrike Naumann.
Yes.
Why did she inspire you with her work, and what did she actually do?
Yeah, absolutely. I looked at her because I wanted to see what contemporary artists. Lots of this project was all of my research was historical, and I wanted to see what people were actually doing today. So Henrike Naumann, she's a great installation artist who works with themes of the GDR in East Germany, and specifically her exhibition called Ostalgie I looked at because it had to do with kind of nostalgia for East Germany. This term Ostalgie is kind of a mixture of the German word for East. And nostalgia. And she would do something really interesting where she would kind of recreate a traditional German home or traditional German room with its furniture and its carpets and its lamps and tables and everything, but it would all be stuck on a wall completely at 90 degrees. I don't know the mechanics of how she managed to get everything to stay up, but it looks really impressive. So everything's flipped on its side, kind of as a critique of this nostalgia that many former East Germans can have towards East Germany, with where they look back on it kind of with rose-tinted glasses and potentially forget about the not so great parts of the state, especially, and this kind of displacement of traditional imagery that Henrike Naumann does was something that I was really inspired by and wanted to put into my work. Kind of displacing and abstracting something very traditional.
That brings us to your actual fashion work that you're working on at the moment.
Yeah.
Can you give us a glimpse into that? So how is this going to look like? What are you working on how many pieces are there?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can give us an introduction into your fashion work.
So it's a little mini collection, 4 looks. And I guess you'd say it won't look very East German. If you look at it, you probably won't think, oh, that's obviously East German clothing. Because I wanted to make something new and I didn't just want to recreate East German clothing. Instead, it's a very tailored collection. I really love sharp tailoring and smooth lines. Especially my favourite fashion designers are like Thierry Mugler from the 80s and Charles James from the 50s, who made beautiful tailored jackets. So I wanted to kind of combine my love for that kind of glamorous tailoring with my historical research into authoritarianism in East Germany. So I've looked at ways of kind of combining these two things, which for me represent the East Germany aspects represent authoritarianism very clearly, and then the glamorous tailoring that for me represents my queer expression and alternative fashion expression. So all the silhouettes are very tailored and round and big shoulders, big hips, very silhouettes that I'm really drawn to. But then there are details of East German uniform clothing and everyday wear clothing, such as like sharp, crisp collars. I've kind of looked at the collar of the Stasi uniform, which through my research I found there's like a specific shape that kept coming up, which was like a really small lapel, like just something specific. And then I've seen how I can displace that. So in one of my garments, it's I put a very clear box around it, put in a different fabric, and then it's surrounded, like this very square collar is then surrounded by very round tailoring. In another one of my looks, I've put the collar all the way on the back of a jacket and it's hanging off the back. So the collar isn't even functional in that case.
So it's kind of a play with this very strict uniform shapes, and you flip it upside down and create something completely new. And in terms of garments, we talk jackets and coats, I guess?
Yes, jackets, coats and pants. That's essentially, jacket dresses. It is still, all very tailored, essentially. That's where my passion lies, so I thought I'd continue with that. In this collection.
In terms of colour, is it going to be very colourful, or are you staying with the uniform colours, which are quite subtle, I guess? What's the idea there?
Yeah, I've stuck with pretty uniform colours. It's mostly green, grey, and like dark grey and grey-green. Yeah, basically very small colour palette. I found a fabric that matches kind of the Stasi uniform grey-green really well. And I'm trying to use it sparingly throughout the collection because I don't just want to recreate Stasi uniforms. I think that'd be a little bit irresponsible of me to just make Stasi uniforms look fashionable. Instead, I'm seeing how those can be deconstructed and used as an interesting way to represent authoritarianism. But it is, a very, very grey, simple colour palette. Also to push myself to bring through the expressive through tailoring. I didn't want to just rely on bright colours to be expressive for me. I wanted to make sure I was actually bringing that through in silhouette and my pen making. And so hopefully I can achieve that.
Very important part. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Who's going to wear your fashion and where? Like, is it going to be presented at some stage, or is it for women? Is it for men? Is it for queer people? Is it for whom are you making those?
I'd say it definitely is for queer people is who I have in mind when I imagine someone wearing it. It's going to be displayed at my university for a while, which will be great, and there'll be a little fashion film alongside it. And the people I've got modelling in mind for it are different people from the queer community. It isn't necessarily men's wear or women's wear. I think some of the looks will be worn by men and some of them by women, but they will all have a potentially more feminine quality to it. I've tried to just not define too much in one way or the other, which is great that my university course allows me to not have to define that. I know some courses you have to decide between men's wear, women's wear. So it's nice that I can just feel that out
Very
myself.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, freedom.
Yeah.
Okay, I already learned a lot from you. Thank you so much. And it's great to kind of go through the story of how you came about the whole project. Maybe just to kind of finish this off I would be interested in, how do you view Germany today? Like having all this knowledge about the country being divided, the east part, which was not just the east, but a whole different country, and the reunification now. How do, as a Kiwi, I guess, with German roots, how do you view Germany today?
Very good question. I'm not so sure. I think I'm always quite impressed by Germany, how it is such a country that has such a difficult past in multiple phases, and seems to have grown and learned from each of them quite well, and it has reunified quite strongly. I know, and it's through my research and through talking to people from East Germany, it's become clear to me that there still is a divide that you can see in places between East and West Germany. So it's been interesting to see the differences of that more, that it is one whole country now, but it hasn't always been that way. How do I see Germany now? That's hard to answer, I think. Yeah, I hope I think I would want to go back to Germany more. Hopefully I'll live there one day, and hopefully I'll get to have a more concrete answer on that.
Have you been in Berlin, seen the Berlin Wall yourself as well?
Yeah, a couple of times.
Did you have a memory you want to share when you saw that came to your mind when you visited the place? Was it more like surprising that it looks like this, or was there some fear coming with that when you were there at the place? Because it's quite, I guess, brutal when you are standing in front of the actual Berlin Wall. Yeah. Do you want to share a memory of that time?
Once we were walking my cousin's dog, actually, through the forest close to her house, just in the outskirts of Berlin, and her pointing to a piece of concrete and being like, "Oh, that's a bit of the Berlin Wall." Potentially it wasn't even a bit. It could have been anything, but she felt pretty sure that was just a bit of the Berlin Wall sitting in the forest there. And I remember that specifically thinking, oh, this was just this was so close to people's homes, and it just went through the whole city, and there are still parts of it here, and it wasn't that long ago, and all that kind of, I remember that really sticking with me, that memory of her just pointing out that was so casually walking through, and it wasn't part of an exhibition, there wasn't a fence around it, it was just a bit of it sitting there. And then and I remember now the last few times we've been walking through the city, taking the tram and stuff, and you can just every now and then still see parts of it. And I know that they've kind of put a line, you can
on the floor.
On the floor you can walk down it, and it's just interesting that it's still parts of it are standing, parts of it aren't, but there's still that line through the city that you can see.
Very last question. You are from Christchurch.
Yes.
And there is a piece of the Berlin Wall sitting in Christchurch.
Yes.
As a young person, what are you thinking about this? That it's now here, or kind of, in New Zealand?
True. I actually have yet to visit that. I must when I'm next time down there. I haven't been back to Christchurch for a long time, for an extended period of time, for a while. I remember my mum sending me photos when the unveiling of that was down here. I think it's the southernmost part of the Berlin Wall now, isn't it, in the world? I think it's quite cool. I guess at first I wasn't really too sure why specifically Christchurch, but then I guess why not Christchurch? It is cool to just put different parts of history across the world, teach people about it, because lots of people don't know what it is or would really have an idea of what it even looks like. So I think it's great to have part of that in Christchurch, and I'm excited to go visit it.
Thank you so much, Quinn. Thanks for your time, and thank you for coming here today. Thank you for listening. This was an interview recorded by the curator of the Berlin Wall Stories exhibition, Alexandra Falk. We hope you enjoyed it. There are 9 more recorded interviews in this playlist. Maybe you want to explore them as well. Thank you and bis bald.